Hi, my name is Leslie Stockel. I am an assistant professor of professional practice at Oklahoma State University in the Fire Protection and Safety Engineering Technology program. I've been a member of ASSP since 1986 when I was a student member at Oklahoma State University, so that means I've been a member for well over 35 years. The case study that I'm going to share with you today is something that I worked on previous to my joining the university. It was at a job that I worked at in the electric utility industry. And I'm going to share with you how we used both safety management systems implementation and risk management and risk analysis to implement and improve our safety management system. So the company that I was working for at the time was a small regional energy corporation. They had a local electric utilities operating in 3 states. They also had power generation facilities with both coal, natural gas, boiler-powered turbines, and then they also had wind and solar energy at this time. They also provided long-range electrical transmission and distribution services, and they operated a natural gas pipeline. This company had about 3,000 employees at the time. Most of the workers were field-based work. In the power plants, there was small-scale crews at the power plants, and then, of course, corporate office and the administrative staffs there. And so what was going on at this company at the time, and this is probably about 6-7 years ago, they actually had a pretty good safety program in place, very traditional, based on compliance with regulation, very heavy into safety and health training, very much into procedures and doing things in sort of that old procedure training-based form of safety. As I said, the company was pretty committed to safety. The leadership of the organization understood the value of safety and understood what was necessary to do that. And overall, the company was in pretty good shape in terms of accident rates. Their incident rates were below industry average, but they had plateaued. So, they sort of this level, and they were having difficulty, driving the results down to that next level. And so, like I said, the leadership, the CEO and the vice presidents and the C-suite level leaders wanted to be better than that. They wanted to drive towards zero. They wanted to be best in class in the industry. There was very strong leadership and support to do that. And also the employees were very switched on. Electric utility employees generally are because of the high-risk nature of the work. And so there was a strong desire to be better. They said, just being below industry average is not good enough, and we want to do more and we want to be more. So one of the downsides at the time was they had very little in terms of documented processes. We had procedures in place for field work, but what we didn't have was this sort of sustainable, process-driven operations that we could improve and use plan, do, check, act, continuous improvement methods on. And so some of the procedures that we had were outdated, and we didn't even have really a process for updating those procedures based on what was new and what was the most current technology at the moment. So again, there was a strong management desire to be best in class, and that's what kind of sparked this idea of, let's implement or let's bring us up to a formalized safety management system using recognized standards that we've all used. And so that was kind of what started us on this journey. And so we kind of put together what we call a safety excellence model. And this is where we wanted to go to transition from what we call traditional safety to this idea of safety excellence. And so one of the things that we used to say in this organization was, we sometimes in safety, you're playing whack-a-mole, right? It's that game that you find in arcades where the little rodents pop up out of a hole and you have to slap them down. If something would pop up and we'd smack it down, we'd solve that problem. And another problem would pop up and we'd smack it down. And we called that playing whack-a-mole safety. But what we wanted to do was we wanted to, using the principles of continuous improvement that we've all seen and known for a long time in quality circles, we wanted to have that plan, do, check, act mentality, continuous improvement mindset, so that we could go from being reactive, playing whack-a-mole, to being proactive, being more intentional, being more risk-based, getting away from traditional safety, and being what we considered to be safety excellence. And so how are we going to do that? So what we did was we came up with a safety management system model. We called it the Safety Excellence Model. What we did was we took the existing standards that were available at the time for safety management systems. So there were kind of two sides to the system. One was processes and procedures and programs that impacted our culture and the way that our employees operated and the way we engaged with our employees. And the other one was the actual physical and logistical systems and tools that we used in our daily business. And the things that were a little more softer, more esoteric, were the things like our values and beliefs systems and safety principles, how our leaders engaged with safety, our recognition and accountability processes, our communication and new employee education systems, our incident communication, using storytelling to send messages for safety, our safety engagement for our employees, such as our committees, health and wellness, and then just overall continuous improvement. And on the systems and tools side, this is the more traditional safety, right? Policies and procedures, managing contractors, emergency preparedness, those technical, physical things that safety professionals do, that's all part of an overall system. And we felt that these were the two sides of the system that we needed to roll into an organized and methodical process that could be improved. We looked at the existing safety standards that were there at the time, starting with ANSI Z10. This was actually prior to the implementation and publication of ANSI 45001. So we started with the European OSAS 18001 standard, but then OSAS 45001 was in draft stage at the time, so we actually did use pieces of it as well. And then we also looked at OSHA's recommended practices for safety and health management and also their voluntary protection program requirements. And what we did was at first we thought we might pick one of those. But really what ended up happening was we decided that we would sort of pull the best things out of all of those standards that really fit in with our business, and we kind of developed our own model. We called it the Safety Excellence Model and pulled out the things that we wanted, that we felt like would work for our organization. So then what we did, we came up with an assessment based on those standards. It was weighted with 15 elements, and I've shown the elements here in the PowerPoint slide. You can see that they were weighted based on importance, and these are all they may come in different formats or structures in all of those existing standards, but all those pieces are there. Things like leadership and culture, planning and administration, risk evaluation, human resources, compliance assurance, project management, training, communications, risk control, asset management, contractors and supply chain, emergency preparedness, learning from events, and risk monitoring, and then continuous improvement, results, and review. Each category was weighted with importance, and then you'll notice that number 9, risk control, is rated much higher than all of the others because that's, identifying, evaluating, assessing, controlling risk that's what we're all about, right? So this was our plan. We used this. There were hundreds of questions, sub-questions within each section. And my role was as sort of the project initiator, project manager. I went around and did the initial assessment. I visited with hundreds of people in the organization, everyone from the CEO to department heads, division heads, to first-line supervisors, to employees. And I rated, based on the hundreds of questions in this assessment tool, where we currently stood as a baseline. So what we were looking for was to establish this baseline so that we could establish what we needed to do for improvement. And so the scoring system was based on a score of 1 to 10, with 1 being insufficient. Whatever the element was, if we scored a 1, it was insufficient, and if it was excellent and it needed no improvement, then we scored a 10. And so I went through every item, and after reviewing records and talking with people, I rated each one, and we came up with an overall scoring system. We also did use a consultant to help us with this part of it. We hired a consultant who has expertise in management system standards, and we did initial training with our leadership team and our managers and our safety staff, and he helped us develop this sort of multidimensional hybrid tool, which then we used to assess the program. So this was the original baseline score. You can see that if there was an overall score rated 1 through 10, and we ended up scoring a 5 out of 10. And you can see the areas highlighted in green were areas that we scored very well in, and then the areas highlighted in red were the ones that we did not score so highly in. And you'll notice the category that was ranked the highest in terms of weight was one of our lower scoring areas, and that was risk control. And it's not so much that we weren't conducting risk control, hazard identification and control, we just didn't have formal documented processes for follow-up. We were playing whack-a-mole. Something would pop up and we'd smack it down. A safety management system requires a more methodical, systematic approach. The interesting thing was when we presented this to our management team, they were shocked. They thought we would score 8 out of 10. They thought we were great. But if you notice up in leadership and culture, we did score very well, and that's because we had a very committed leadership team. But it takes more than just being committed to have an overall good safety management system. And so even though everyone was committed, some of our systems and processes were not where they needed to be. And it was those highly weighted areas that were not what they needed to be. So there was our opportunity for improvement. There was the places where we could improve and develop, and we could get this program going or get this system going in an organized and methodical way. We came up with 187 gaps from our assessment tool. They ranged from simple and complex, just even something from as simple as having the safety policy printed on a poster with the CEO's signature, and it was distributed throughout the organization. We had a policy, but it was not signed by the CEO, and it was not in a place where everyone could see it. So we scored poorly in that category. So that was a very simple, easy to fix thing. But then we had really complex things like arc flash analysis and arc flash training. We, at the time, had not really fully implemented those requirements yet. So the 187 gaps, this is a lot. And so we thought, well, how are we going to eat this elephant? That's a lot. So what we did, one of the other things that was pretty complex that we hadn't really done fully was implement a comprehensive contractor management system. We had pieces in place, but we didn't have a comprehensive system that we could track and improve. Another one was just once we identified those hazards, we didn't really track them and keep up with them in a risk inventory. And so again, something that we were doing, just not doing it really well, and there was awful room for improvement there. And then I talked about the arc flash hazard assessment. One of the other big categories that wasn't really difficult to implement, but it was a high scoring, high weighted element in the assessment, was safety inspections for materials received by supply chain. So again, something we could do. But the analysis and the baseline assessment helped us capture these items, and then we were able to set, once you know what you need to do, you can set a plan to doing it. But the idea of 187 gaps was a little bit overwhelming to everyone. And so we figured, what are we going to do about that? So what we did was we took those 187 gaps and we put them in a spreadsheet, and we used a very traditional risk assessment matrix. I'm showing you on the screen a 5x5 risk assessment matrix. So we took every element, every gap, and we said, what will happen if we do nothing about this gap? And we rated it in terms of consequence and also likelihood in terms of, will someone get injured or killed? Will we receive some kind of environmental or regulatory citation? What would be the impact of us not doing this element? A third element that we used in our assessment was the cost and complexity of implementation, because as you can imagine, it's pretty easy to make a poster and have the CEO sign it and post that around the workplace, and so that's easy. But an arc flash hazard assessment is going to be much more difficult, right? We just used a simple risk calculation of consequence times likelihood and then the implementation factor. And then that very quickly and very easily gave us a list of items with the most important things, shining to the top so that we could use our strategy there. Now, the thing that was a little bit tricky was the definition between these levels, 1 through 5. What is the difference between negligible and severe? And so one of the things that's important anytime you're using a risk assessment matrix is to define your levels. And this particular company, again, they were a mid-size operating in 3 states. And so we assigned values to what we considered to be a severe risk versus a negligible risk, and then also unlikely to almost certain. That's important, and it's also important to communicate those levels because you need everyone to be on the same page when it comes to understanding what the risk level is. So that's what we did there. So from this, and this is a little bit of an eye chart, but it's intended to be that way, we color-coded based on the number, the final product of that scoring. And then from that, 187 gaps, the things that were most important rose to the top of the list. And we were able from there to put together a 5-year plan based on risk in order to address and improve the gaps. We integrated this plan. We had this huge wall posters made of all 187 gaps ranked in order by risk, and we posted those all around our buildings and our workplaces so that everyone in the organization could see these are the things that we need to do to be world-class and to have a safety excellence system. And so we integrated these things. We assigned accountabilities. This person or this organization is responsible for implementation. Some of the responsibilities fell to the safety department, but some fell to operations or engineering or maintenance. And everyone had their assignment, and everyone had dates with which they needed to complete these things by. And so we were able to create SMART goals, specific, measurable, actionable, achievable, and time-oriented, based on improving these gaps. And these were integrated into the safety performance reviews. And so because of this, we were able to use leading indicators instead of lagging indicators. Instead of waiting for something to happen, we were able to actually have leading indicators for safety. We updated this list quarterly with percent completion, 10% complete, 50%, 80, 90% complete, and then we set about to improve our program from there. Again, shifting the focus away from those lagging indicators of incident rate. So just in summary, that was probably 5-6 years ago. I left the company probably, before the end of that 5-year period. But what I do know is with any safety and health management system, it's a never-ending proposition. After about 5 years, the plan was going to be to reassess based on that assessment tool and see where the improvements were made, look for additional opportunities for improvement, and actually systematize that process, which was the 15th element of that safety management system, was ongoing evaluation and review. And so from there, our plan was to evaluate every 5 years, see where the gaps were, do a risk assessment on those gaps, and then continues to improve year after year. So I left that company to move to Oklahoma State University to become a faculty member. I still have contacts back with that company, and they tell me that they're continuing to work on the plan, and they are seeing improvement, and so things seem to be working well. So that's my story in terms of using both risk assessment and safety management systems to improve an overall safety plan. I hope you found it informational and helpful. And so I thank you for your time and hope you have a safe day.